When it comes to Kojima Productions, the unexpected is almost expected. Koji Pro's games may not resonate with everyone, but titles like Death Stranding explore concepts and ideas in ways that few big-budget AAA games dare to attempt. It's precisely this boundary-pushing approach, in fact, that makes me value studios such as Kojima Productions and, say, Remedy Entertainment, teams that successfully blend the production values of AAA development with the creative freedom more often found in the indie scene. Death Stranding 2 is no exception. Building on the predecessor's unconventional foundation, it evolves the formula into something so compelling it almost makes the original feel like a proof of concept by comparison. But if there's one constant you can count on from a Kojima Productions release, it's the masterful fusion of striking art direction and top-tier technical execution. In a generation dominated by multi-platform cross-gen releases, it's refreshing to see a title that not only launches exclusively on a single platform, but also raises the bar visually, and that's exactly what the team has delivered here. For my money, Death Stranding 2 stands among the most visually impressive games of the current console generation. So in today's Digital Foundry analysis, I want to break it all down. From the environments and character rendering to visual effects and even audio design, there's a lot of things here to showcase today. At the end then, I'll share my thoughts on how the gameplay itself has evolved and discuss my overall feelings on the experience as a whole. So, without further delay, let's get into it. Crossing the vast expanse, one foot in front of the other, the world stretches out before you. The sky and land mingle at a distance as the sun arcs across the sky above. There's no other games that quite capture this specific feeling of existing alone in such a vast space. It's special and central to the very core of Death Stranding. The original game took place across an Icelandic-inspired take on a ruined United States. The sequel introduces players instead to Mexico and Australia. The mission to connect one another remains constant, but the experience as you journey through the game is greatly enhanced by increased variety and improved technology. That technology is rooted in the Guerrilla Games Decima Engine, which has been deftly utilized by Koji Pro's team to create some truly outstanding dynamic landscapes. The leap here is perhaps not quite on the same level as we saw between the first two Horizon games, but that's only because the original Death Stranding set the bar so high. The first key improvement you might notice stems from fine detail, both near and far, similar to Forbidden West. That is, compared to the original, rock formations, vegetation, and other natural landscape elements hold up very well under scrutiny. The game opens in this gorgeous mountain range with a level of detail reminiscent of Epic's nanite virtualized geometry demos, but is achieved without relying on any such technology. The game is packed full of exceptionally fine detail, building on the already great results from the first game and taking it to the next level. There are still large open fields full of finely detailed stones, rocks, and pebbles, but there's also more variety this time. Deserts, lush forest areas, the ruins of a civilization, and more. There's definitely a greater sense of progression across this game as you proceed forward. Gaze toward the sky, however, and you'll also spot improvements to the original's ray march volumetric system. This allows more variety in the cloud formations, and generally produces cleaner overall results. The marriage of the two is spectacular, especially in HDR, which, by the way, this entire video is being presented in HDR, if you have such a display. But where we really start to see divergence from the original game lies in the more dynamic elements. Things like lighting, weather, and environmental effects all greatly expanded here. For starters, the game now boasts a fully real-time time of day system with smooth transitions between day and night. Watch closely and you'll spot dynamic shadows adjusting in real time according to the sun's position, resulting in some dramatic moments, such as here in the desert where the sun begins to set behind the mountains, shrouding this valley in shadow. Or how about in this lush jungle area, the sun begins to peek up between the trees, shining its light through the leaves, creating this beautiful looking scenario. And while we're in this area, I should also note that I like how they handle the shadows in this game. While it can't match ray traced shadows or anything, the sharpness of the shadow penumbra does seem to vary based on the proximity to the object. Like here in the forest, Sam's shadow is a lot sharper than the more diffuse shadows seen from the trees. Shadows are largely artifact-free throughout the game, which is absolutely critical towards keeping that believability intact. In addition, the game unsurprisingly makes use of screen space shadows for finer details, such as those cast by small plants. It's another example of using well-worn techniques to good effect to create something that does look beautiful while remaining performant. The game's approach to both direct and indirect lighting is visually striking, though, as always, not without limitations. From what I can tell, it relies on a pre-calculated probe-based global illumination system with multiple light bakes corresponding to different times of day. This technique works by placing a grid of light probes throughout the environment, essentially sampling points that store indirect lighting information. These probes then inform how the surfaces nearby are lit, allowing for reasonably realistic bounce lighting without the computational expense of real-time ray tracing, because yes, there is no evidence of real-time ray tracing being used here. But despite that, the overall image remains beautiful and cohesive. You'll find areas where the lighting can fall a little bit short, and it's obviously not going to match a real-time ray-traced global illumination system, but it still looks absolutely beautiful. I'm especially fond of sequences where sunlight filters into these interior spaces, be it within enemy installations or aboard the Magellan, producing a moody atmospheric glow that heightens the atmosphere. What really adds to the game's dynamic feel, however, is the sheer variety of weather effects and how they impact the environment in meaningful ways. So as with the original, rain and tar continue to play a pivotal role. When caught in the timefall, for instance, thick tar begins to seep up from the earth, enveloping the landscape in a convincing, eerie fashion. The way these phenomena integrate with the gameplay remains one of the game's signature elements. This time, however, water, too, has received a noticeable upgrade, comparable in quality to what we saw with Horizon Forbidden West, albeit with some additional dynamism. A dry riverbed, for instance, might suddenly transform into a raging torrent following a heavy downpour or flash flood. It's not just a visual effect, it directly impacts the traversal and moment-to-moment gameplay. Rushing water also features a robust foam simulation along with floating debris, while calmer bodies of water also behave more realistically. Surface reflections across water and metal alike utilize a blend of screen space reflections with height field ray marching, helping to reduce the typical disocclusion artifacts you see with SSR. Yes, screen space issues are still present if you go looking for them, for sure, but they're masked more effectively than in many other comparable titles, especially when used on water. On the topic of reflections though, one standout moment involves a fireworks display surrounding the player. The spectacle itself is amazing, with a dense array of GPU-driven particles lighting up the scenery around you. But what's even more striking is that these particles are also reflected across nearby surfaces. This isn't just typical SSR play, obviously. The reflections appear to mirror the particles themselves, resulting in a remarkably consistent and immersive presentation. And yes, all of this runs at a rock-solid 60 frames per second. The particle work then is exceptional. Rain, as in the original, is superbly handled, something you'd expect from a team with roots tracing back to Metal Gear Solid 2 and its iconic tanker chapter. Rain lashes the environment, droplets refract light as they strike the virtual lens, and when the action slows down, such as during hand-to-hand combat, these effects continue to animate realistically in slow motion. It's a true visual treat. Beyond the rain, other types of weather and environmental conditions can appear as well. Sandstorms, for instance, generate a towering wall of particulate matter that engulfs the player. As you push through, you're met with fierce winds and poor visibility. The effect combines volumetric rendering with billboarded sand particles, while Sam's suit accumulates sand in real time. Cross a body of water afterward, and that sand is convincingly washed away. It's more than just a visual flourish. These storms impact gameplay as well. You can use them to evade pursuers, for instance, and the wind itself has a physical presence, pushing Sam around and making traversal that much more difficult. There's even a scene where you'll encounter these fire-based effects paired with thick volumetric smoke that gradually fills the air with an oppressive cinematic haze. It's deeply atmospheric, and also, again, directly ties into the gameplay. And that's one of the big components with this game, is that all of these cool effects and various systems that are integrated here do actually matter in terms of how you play the game and cross the world of Death Stranding 2. Of course, there's other details that have nothing to do with gameplay, but definitely add some additional nice touches to the experience. For instance, the terrain deformation system. This appears similar to what we saw in the most recent Horizon game, but essentially, footprints now persist in areas like this for extended periods of time, adding a grounded physicality to the traversal. There's also more lush environments, packed with dense, detailed foliage that sways believably in the wind, while also reacting to most of Sam's movements, though, as always, there are occasional limitations in interactivity, with Sam's legs clipping right through smaller plants. But as stunning as these environments and the associated effects may be, there are some nitpicks I can level with the game, specifically when looking at the mid-range terrain system. Firstly, the ambient occlusion system produces obvious blotchiness around small plants, particularly when juxtaposed against the rocky terrain, while reflections can also produce some noisy artifacts as well. These are expectedly rendered at a lower precision, likely for performance reasons, but as a result can sometimes be a little distracting. More noticeable, however, is the mid-field level of detail system. Near-field areas directly around Sam feature exquisite detail, as I've already pointed out, while the silhouette of distant scenery never fails to impress. The mountain ranges, rock formations, everything looks great from afar. But if you look somewhere in the middle, that point of the image where the far field and near field are connected, you'll spot some surprisingly low-resolution textures at times, essentially filling in the gaps around the more complex rock formations. You won't necessarily notice this often during normal play, especially when moving across the terrain, but when you stand up from a vantage point and look down across the world, you might spot it, and honestly, it doesn't look great. There's also some strange time of day lighting choices that can occur from time to time, leaving the game world looking a little bit on the odd side, but given the themes of the game, I'm sure this is intentional and it's fine. Really though, this is all just nitpicking. The overall depiction of scenery and natural phenomena remains top tier, some of the best virtual landscapes you'll encounter in any game on the market, I'd say, and at a level of variety that expands way beyond the original Death Stranding. But if we bring the scope back in, that brings us to our next topic, the cast. Death Stranding 2 places a renewed emphasis on storytelling, and in pursuit of that goal, Kojima Productions once again taps into its extensive Hollywood connections, assembling a cast of high-profile actors and actresses to bring its unconventional narrative to life. The original game already featured some of the most impressive character modeling and animation work of the previous console generation, so my expectations were high. But even then, the improvements on display here managed to surprise and delight. As you know, the character presentation is split between real-time in-game rendering and the directed cutscenes, which are also real-time. And for my money, Death Stranding 2 delivers some of the finest cinematic direction I've encountered in any game to date. Everything from careful pacing to the expert framing of each shot exudes confidence. Camera movement is smooth and purposeful, often paired with filmic bokeh depth of field effects that lend a striking sense of depth and focus. The character models themselves are instrumental in selling this illusion. Skin shading has received a significant upgrade. Subsurface scattering is more nuanced, and pores, micro details, and blemishes are rendered with extraordinary clarity. Eye rendering has also improved, bringing characters to life in a way that almost feels tangible, while hair rendering shows progress as well. The strands move believably, clump together naturally, and respond to lighting in a way that further grounds the characters in this strange world. When you compare it to the original game, these improvements become evident. It's often subtle, but there's definitely something more realistic about the new game. Animation quality then, both facial and full body, remains stellar as well. Every subtle expression, blink, shift in gaze, or twitch of the lip is captured with remarkable fidelity. These secondary animations make the characters feel alive. When you combine these elements then, the results are super impressive. So take a look at this scene, one that was featured in pre-release media. Pay close attention to the micro details, the music, and overall scene direction. Incredible, right? Even without knowing anything about what's happening here, the music, animation, camera work, and sense of mystery are all palpable. As the character removes the bag from his head, for instance, pay close attention to how the skin around his nose and mouth subtly shifts and stretches in response. It's a small detail, but one that exemplifies the level of care poured into the animation system. The skin shading, nuanced lighting, and lifelike eye rendering all coalesce to bring this character to life. There's a real presence here, almost as if you're watching a real person rather than a mere facsimile of one. But of course, outside of these cinematic scenes, Death Stranding 2 is still very much a game, and character rendering during gameplay matters just as much. This is where Kojima Productions' efforts become even more impressive then. The team has iterated on and refined the already exceptional real-time model and animation work established in the first game. Let's start with the level of detail. If you stop and zoom in on Sam, or any major character for that matter, you'll find an extraordinary amount of micro detail across every surface. The texture resolution is indeed impressively high, but it's not just about sharpness. Look closely and you'll see intricately sculpted fabric meshes, dirt and moisture accumulation across the clothing, and faint imperfections in the metals. This kind of layered detail isn't just technically impressive, it adds believability, reinforcing the harshness of the world that these characters inhabit. The one nitpick and the noticeable difference between the cutscenes and the gameplay stems from shadows, or rather the lack thereof. There's a lot of fine detail that does not receive the shadows that you might expect them to. It's a problem that something like ray tracing could solve, but of course that is not here. Still, from the normal gameplay perspective, I'd say it's by and large good enough. Now, animation work is great too. Inverse kinematics are deployed once again to ensure that Sam's foot placement generally matches the rocky terrain. It's not 100% perfect, of course, but the effect is generally a success. You can really feel the variable weight of Sam's cargo and the differences in terrain that you encounter. In certain scenes, Sam sports a lengthy coat with excellent cloth simulation that behaves naturally as you navigate the world, while in others you can see secondary animations applied to things like straps and buckles. When taken together, the combination of high-quality character rendering coupled with dramatic environments creates a game that really shines. But given everything thus far has been captured on the PS5 Pro, you might be wondering, how does it fare on the base PlayStation 5? While Death Stranding 2 is currently a PlayStation 5 exclusive, it's not confined to a single hardware configuration, because of course it supports both the PS5 and the PS5 Professional. While the core experience is largely identical across both systems, which is important, there are some nuanced differences worth touching on. For starters, both consoles offer two primary visual settings, a performance mode and a quality mode, selectable via the in-game menu. When using performance mode on a capable display, the game also outputs at 120 Hz. This not only improves input latency, but presumably also expands the VRR window, offering smoother motion stability across more scenarios. I say presumably because frankly, performance is not a major talking point here. Both consoles manage to deliver exceptional frame rate stability. Whether you're playing at 30 FPS in quality mode or 60 FPS in performance mode, both platforms hold their targets with impressive consistency. I encountered some subtle weirdness with the camera at times, but upon further inspection it actually appears to be an issue with the camera itself rather than any sort of dropped frames. So in terms of raw performance, the frame delivery is rock solid. So what actually separates the two? Well, it largely comes down to image quality and detail, especially in performance mode. On the base system, resolution hovers around 1440p, and while the image holds up reasonably well thanks to Guerrilla's reconstruction techniques, it does show typical signs of edge instability. Edge breakup, subpixel shimmering, and some softness and fine detail. On the Pro, however, things look visibly sharper. Weirdly enough, the resolution appears to only be slightly higher on average, but image quality does indeed appear slightly better on the PS5 Pro. Specifically, there's a little bit less shimmering and noise on distant objects. That's not to say it's perfect on the Pro, but it's definitely a little better. The game also seems to hold a higher resolution more often on the PS5 Pro, more closely resembling the quality mode in fact. Terrain detail at a distance also sees enhancement. Geometry and texture LODs are slightly improved on the Pro, giving far-off landscapes a little more visual richness. They don't transform the game, mind you, but it does elevate the overall presentation in subtle yet meaningful ways. Interestingly, on the base system, the gap between quality and performance mode is quite noticeable. Performance mode sacrifices enough image quality that some players may actually prefer the higher fidelity 30 FPS presentation. On the Pro, however, the differences between these two modes are so minor that performance mode becomes the obvious choice. In my view, quality mode is largely redundant on the Pro. It looks excellent, sure, but the performance mode is nearly identical and plays a lot better. Now, in terms of loading times, as you might expect, they're superb across the board. Transitions from the title screen to the in-game sections are virtually instantaneous, and loading within the game world is seamless. It's really a nice reminder of how far we've come from last-gen bottlenecks. Lastly, HDR is supported, though it's controlled entirely via the system-level PS5 settings, aside from a single brightness slider. The game itself doesn't offer much in the way of adjustment for this, but if your display is properly calibrated using the system-level tool, the results are good. Bright highlights punch through nicely, and there's a satisfying contrast in darker scenes. So yeah, overall I'd place the professional upgrade in a similar category to what we saw with Horizon Forbidden West. Doesn't necessarily transform the experience per se, but it meaningfully enhances image quality and edge detail, especially in performance mode, while maintaining the same stellar performance and loading speeds you expect. Whether you're on base or the Pro, Death Stranding 2 offers a great experience, but for those on Pro hardware, there's that extra bit of visual polish that really elevates the journey.
PC does it.
As we move into our final chapter then, there's two other things I want to tackle, the audio and the game itself. Specifically why I feel this sequel stands tall above the original. Firstly, sound. For me, audio is as important as the visuals when it comes to creating a memorable experience. The sound effects, voice acting, and especially the music must all work in tandem to create something that truly draws you in. Death Stranding 2 is one of those games that so beautifully pulls this off that I found myself wanting to revisit scenes just to experience it once again. I would say it starts immediately with the Kojima Productions logo. The sound here, it's curious, it's weirdly engaging. Just a company logo, sure, but it really makes you feel like you're about to begin something special. Then we transition to the introduction sequence, which pairs Minus 61, a track by French artist Woodkid, with a moody credit sequence. But it's not just that they inserted a song into the game and called it a day, rather, the sound itself, the music, progresses based on the player's actions. So after handing control to the player seamlessly, I might add, the song will gently loop this section. But as you begin to move, notice how the song progresses. This sort of attention to detail, the dynamism, is something one can feel throughout the game in its soundscape. Of course, the music during all the cinematics is as outstanding as the original. It sets the mood with this dark electronic tone that sounds wholly original and unlike anything else. But also, if you just listen to the sound during gameplay, there's this subtle use of music, sound of, say, pouring rain. Everything around you just fills the room, and it does beautifully support both surround sound speakers and headphones. It's phenomenal stuff. Honestly, as far as audio goes, it's one of the best sounding games I've played in the last few years. Not just the technical quality, but also in terms of style and mood. Death Stranding 2 has a unique sound signature that blends a stunning original score with perfectly selected licensed tunes that are molded to fit the game. It's a masterpiece of sound. But now, if I may, I'd like to pivot once again and talk about the game itself. You see, I'm a fan of the original. It changed the nature of what an open world game can be. Death Stranding deprioritized waypoint events. You know, as in most games where the main beats of the story and all the action tend to only occur when you reach a specific waypoint. But Death Stranding kind of inverts that. Most of the action really happens between objectives on the way to that marker. Death Stranding 2 continues this tradition, but Kojima has seen fit to massively expand the overall arsenal and capabilities of what Sam can do. So now, on the way to your next objective, instead of simply surviving the terrain, you'll face off against foes a lot more often. Right away, early in the game for instance, you come across a checkpoint, the border between Mexico and the US, in ruins of course. There's enemies on patrol here, and now, using non-lethal weapons, you have the option of taking them out slowly, one by one. It's a familiar beat of stealth action that any fan of Metal Gear Solid might recognize. We see it again a short time later. You build a watchtower here and observe the enemies, surveying the land, marking your targets, before slowly making your way into the hot zone, taking out targets along the way. It's reminiscent of the kind of action you'd find in Metal Gear Solid 5 actually. Almost like this game represents a fusion between the Phantom Pain and the original Death Stranding. But it's the sense of adventure and occurrence of the unexpected that impressed me the most. Take this mission. I needed to deliver a large amount of cargo to a remote base, so I needed to load up a vehicle and drive all the way out there, right? So after departing, the journey started smooth enough, but soon you enter a field full of BTs. Yes, this mechanic has returned from the original, but it's a little easier to fight back now. I tried to drive straight through, but was caught. Using blood grenades though, which I packed for the journey, I was able to deal with them this time and drive the cargo back into safety. From here though, we have a peaceful journey along the floor of a valley, dodging rocks and working your way up a hill. before eventually arriving at a massive cliffside with one heck of a view. Now, after taking in the sights, I made my way down this slope here and began driving towards my destination, but as you can see, there's an enemy base awaiting us, so I decided to park my vehicle off to the side and hopped out on foot. From here, I attempted to infiltrate with some initial success, but eventually, I was caught. I ran for it and managed to escape their sights. From there, I slowly eliminated other enemies from the area before resorting to an assault rifle to take out the remaining stragglers. One of the cool things about these stealth sequences, though, is that they actually integrate a story element directly into the gameplay. Dollman, for instance, the stop-motion character that you'll spend a lot of time with in this game, who also kind of serves as your codec-style buddy, you can actually toss him way up into the air and, through his eyes, observe the battlefield in front of you, marking targets along the way. So from this point, I went back to my truck and started driving once again, not considering that I had left the chiral network behind, because you see, without the chiral network you cannot build new structures, which is why when my battery ran dry, I was unable to build a charging station. Yeah, the truck was stuck. So I decided to store all of my items that I had been carrying in the truck and grabbed only the cargo necessary for delivery. I then slowly trudged across the mountains, arriving at the destination just as the sun began to rise. It was almost poetic. This is just one mission in the game, and not even one that drives the story forward, yet it was extremely enjoyable to play through it. This is the kind of thing I love about the game. Essentially, with Death Stranding 2, compared to that original, there's a lot more variety, there's more action, and yet it still offers that lonely tranquility that defines the original. I guess it could be argued that adding all these different options into the mix takes away from the purity of that original Death Stranding experience, but I definitely like this combination of Metal Gear Solid 5 style stealth action with the more delivery focused aspects of the original Death Stranding. It's not perfect, of course. The AI is rather sensitive and it can be difficult to dodge them, but you eventually get used to it. On the easier difficulties, you can also just kind of punch and kick your way through most enemies, which is why I definitely recommend playing on one of the harder options. It forces you to spend more time planning and figuring out how to get around these enemies. The overall game loop, however, is a big success. You have more options, more ways to play, and the scenarios themselves tend to be more varied. It's really everything I wanted out of a sequel. So yeah, here we are, 34 minutes into this video, and I think I've made my thoughts on the game pretty clear. And frankly, if you're worried about any spoilers in the video, don't be. It's really just scratching the surface. There's so much more awaiting you here. When reflecting back on my experience playing through Death Stranding 2, I realized that it's probably going to be one of those experiences I think about for years to come, which is frankly how I felt about many of Kojima's works in the past. Of course, it's still a game not for everyone, that's for sure, but I do think it's worth taking a look. And at the very least, it's an absolutely wonderful technical showpiece, and an example of why Decima is such a powerful tool. Plus, it shows just how talented Kojima Productions' team truly is. But with that, we've reached the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the other side.